Raphael had always believed he was a disciplined man. After all, he had graduated with honors, built a career as a promising software engineer, and earned the kind of salary his parents once only dreamed of. From the outside, he looked like the calm, stable, reliable type, the kind of man who had it figured out. But behind the neat desk and polite smile lived a truth he desperately tried to hide. Raphael couldn't stick to anything that genuinely mattered. Every new habit he tried to build followed the exact same tragic pattern, as predictable as seasons changing. On Monday, he felt unstoppable. This time, I'm doing it. By Wednesday, the first internal arguments began whispering in the back of his mind. By Friday, he had surrendered completely. And by Sunday night, he was already planning his next fresh start, convincing himself that somehow, magically, the next Monday would be different. It never was. He had tried everything the internet recommended. Fancy habit tracking apps that celebrated tiny wins with fireworks animations, reward systems, cold showers, public checklists, accountability buddies who were just as inconsistent as he was. None of it worked. None of it even came close. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that he wasn't fighting laziness at all. He was fighting the very architecture of his own brain. The breaking point arrived quietly, on a night that should have been ordinary. Raphael stood in his apartment after another failed attempt at building a routine. The gym membership he had renewed with so much enthusiasm was unused again. The meditation cushion gathered dust. A half-read book lay abandoned on the nightstand under a thin layer of neglect. A part of him wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but another part, deeper, heavier, felt something close to grief. "How can I succeed at everything except the things that matter?" he whispered to himself. It wasn't self-pity. It was confusion, a fundamental bewilderment at why someone smart, responsible, and perfectly capable could not perform the simplest consistency, waking up at the same time, exercising a little, reading a few pages a day. Tasks that millions of people managed effortlessly. Why not him? The answer came from an unexpected place. One evening, while scrolling through articles about human behavior, Raphael stumbled upon a reference to an ancient discipline practiced by Zen monks in Japan. It wasn't willpower-based. It wasn't motivational. It wasn't about trying harder. In fact, it seemed to reject everything the modern world teaches about habits. The monks called it gyoji, practice that continues by itself. The phrase seemed almost mystical, even impossible. Practice that continues by itself? Without forcing it? Without struggling through negotiation? Without fighting the morning battle between desire and discipline? Intrigued, Raphael began reading more. He discovered that in certain monasteries, the day began at the same time, precisely 3:30 a.m., and had been this way since the year 1200. No monk had ever woken up at 3:32. No monk had ever skipped the morning ritual because he didn't feel like it. The question of waking up or skipping never even appeared in their minds. It simply wasn't part of the mental landscape. They had achieved a level of consistency that modern humans, with all their apps and planning systems, could barely imagine. Raphael felt a strange heat rise in his chest. Something in him, an instinct older than thought, recognized the truth immediately. He had been approaching discipline completely wrong. He had been trying to motivate himself into consistency, trying to negotiate with his own brain, trying to feel like it. The monks didn't negotiate. They didn't rely on motivation. They didn't treat a habit as a behavior. They treated it as identity. And the line hit him like a blow. Your brain has only two categories for commitments: reversible and irreversible. A reversible commitment is, "I'll try." An irreversible one is, "This is who I am now." Zen monks didn't take vows privately. They took them in front of the whole community, Their identity changed in the eyes of others. Their failure wasn't just disappointing, it was unthinkable. And for the first time in his life, Raphael began to understand why he failed everything. Every commitment he made was reversible. Everything he did could be undone with a simple thought. Not today. That night, staring at the blank wall of his bedroom, Raphael felt something within him shift. A tiny crack opened, not of defeat, but of awakening. He realized he had been living in a cycle of small deaths. The death of promises broken, the death of potential wasted, the death of self-respect eroded day after day. He didn't want a fresh start anymore. He wanted transformation. And transformation, he finally understood, required something terrifying. The death of the person he was. Not improvement, not optimization, not trying harder. Death. The death of the version of himself that negotiated with everything. The version that apologized for quitting. The version that lived on excuses and self-delusion. And so, with a trembling but determined breath, Raphael made a decision. Not a reversible one, not a wish, not a hope. A vow. He didn't know it yet, but this vow would drag him into a world of discipline so pure, so relentless, that people around him would later call it frightening. This was the night the old Raphael began to die, and the night the unstoppable one began to wake. Raphael woke the next morning with a strange sense of clarity, the kind that appears only after a moment of internal collapse. The world outside his window looked the same. Quiet streets, early sunlight filtering through thin curtains. But something inside him had shifted during the night. Not dramatically, not loudly, but unmistakably. A door had closed. Another had opened. He didn't yet know what to do with this new awareness, but he felt an instinctive pull toward understanding the monk's secret more deeply. If they could maintain unbroken discipline for centuries, there had to be a mechanism, something more powerful than motivation or self-help advice. Something ancient, perhaps primitive, buried inside the psychology of being human. So he dug further. The more he read about the Zen monasteries of medieval Japan, the more one idea stared back at him with a kind of ruthless simplicity. Gyoji, practice that continues without interruption. Not practice you force yourself to do. Not practice when you feel like it. But practice that becomes so integrated into your identity and environment that stopping becomes unthinkable. Raphael was fascinated by one particular anecdote written by a 13th century monk. It described the daily routine at the Eiheiji temple, a routine that had remained unchanged since the year 1200. Every morning at exactly 3:30 a.m., a bell was struck. Not at 3:29, not at 3:31. The precision wasn't just tradition, it was identity. The monks didn't wake up because they felt disciplined. They woke up because they were monks. There was no version of reality where a monk would hear the bell and stay in bed. It wasn't discipline. It was inevitability. Raphael read that line over and over again, his mind circling around it like an animal studying something both threatening and sacred. Inevitability. That was the word missing from his life. Everything he did was optional. Everything could be postponed, renegotiated, delayed, avoided. Even when he said, "I will," he actually meant, "I'll try." And somewhere deep in his brain, the primitive part of him listened to these reversible commitments and treated them as weak, fragile, non-binding, like a child promising to clean his room later. This insight would have been enough to shake him, but the research he found next was even more startling. A Harvard neuroscientist who spent 15 years studying habit formation discovered that the human brain classifies commitments into two categories: reversible and irreversible. The part of the brain responsible for survival, status, and social belonging reacts violently to irreversible commitments, public, witnessed, Identity-based commitments, because historically, failing those commitments meant losing face in the tribe. And losing face in the tribe often meant losing protection, resources, and ultimately survival. Evolution had carved these instincts deep. Raphael suddenly saw the truth. His brain was not broken. It was behaving exactly as it was designed to. Every time he privately told himself he'd start a new habit, his brain categorized it as reversible, safe to abandon. No threat, no consequence, no need to protect the commitment. But monks changed the category entirely. They ritualized the commitment. They witnessed it. They transformed it into identity. And everything inside Raphael began to rearrange itself around this realization. If he wanted monk-like consistency, he needed monk-like mechanisms. He needed to create an irreversible commitment. So he crafted one. He sat at his desk, pulled out a sheet of paper, and wrote a declaration, not poetic, not motivational, but precise and binding. I am the kind of person who practices every single day at 5 a.m. I meditate for 10 minutes, read for 10 minutes, and complete 20 push-ups. This is my identity for the next 90 days, without exception. He signed it. Not because signatures are magical, but because signatures turn intentions into contracts. Then, with a trembling breath, he took the step that scared him most. He posted it publicly. His heart pounded as he pressed publish. There was no going back now. His friends, co-workers, acquaintances, everyone would see. Everyone would know. If he failed, it would not be private. It would be witnessed. And his brain, ancient and instinctual, registered the shift. This is no longer safe to abandon. Within minutes, reactions came pouring in. His girlfriend texted, "You're being way too dramatic." His coworker messaged, "Bro, it's not that serious." An old classmate commented, "Good luck with that, LOL." Perfect, Raphael thought. Their skepticism didn't discourage him, it fueled him. Every dismissive comment, every skeptical emoji, every sarcastic "good luck" forged another iron bar in the prison surrounding his reversible self. He didn't need cheerleaders, he needed witnesses. The next morning at 5 a.m., his alarm rang. His body begged him to stay in bed. His mind offered its usual excuses. But for the first time, something stronger pushed back. The unbearable thought of admitting failure publicly, of looking his friends in the eye and confessing he lasted only 3 days. The fear of losing status, the ancient tribal fear, overpowered every excuse. He got up. The first day was messy. He stumbled through meditation. His push-ups were sloppy, his reading unfocused. But it didn't matter. Completion mattered. Continuity mattered. The vow had been made. Day 2 hurt even more. But he woke up. Day 3 nearly broke him. But he woke up. And as he stood in front of the bathroom mirror that morning, exhausted but strangely proud, he began to understand the deeper secret behind the monk system. Discipline is not built through effort. It is built through identity enforced by irreversible commitment. Raphael had stepped into a new world, one where the negotiation with himself was no longer allowed, a world where every excuse sounded weak, childish, ridiculous compared to the weight of what he had declared. He didn't realize it yet, but this was only the beginning. The war inside him hadn't been resolved. It had only been declared. The first week of Raphael's new life arrived like a storm, loud, chaotic, and merciless. His public declaration had removed the option of quitting, but it did not silence the enemy inside him. In fact, it seemed to awaken it. Every morning at 5 a.m., before Raphael even opened his eyes, the battle began. You barely slept. Stay in bed. You can start again tomorrow. One day doesn't matter. This is unhealthy. This is extreme. Be reasonable. The voice was subtle at first, a quiet whisper in the fog of dawn. But as the days went on, it sharpened into something more aggressive, more cunning. It knew exactly where to strike, where Raphael was weakest, where he doubted himself most. On day 6, he almost broke. The alarm rang, slicing through the darkness, and Raphael felt as if his body was made of cement. His head throbbed, his chest felt heavy. A pressure behind his eyes pulsed with exhaustion. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. For the first time since making his vow, he felt true resistance, not irritation, not inconvenience, but a deep biological refusal. His entire body screamed for rest. He shut his eyes and breathed slowly, as if trying to steady a shaking machine. Then another thought appeared, not a whisper, but a heavy, undeniable truth. If you skip today, you're the same man you were before. He could not return to that, not after everything he had declared, not after burning his bridges behind him. With trembling hands, he pushed himself up and walked to the bathroom. His reflection looked nothing like a monk, hair messy, eyes half shut, face pale. But he didn't need to look like one. He needed to act like one. The first 7 days were brutal, but nothing prepared him for what came next. Because even as the mental negotiations began to weaken, a new enemy emerged, one he didn't expect: decision fatigue. Every morning, after waking up at 5 a.m., Raphael had to choose what to do first. Sometimes he meditated, other times he did push-ups. Some mornings he read instead. He convinced himself that variety kept things interesting, made the practice feel fresh. But all it really did was open a new battlefield. What do I start with today? Maybe meditation. No, I'm too tired. Maybe reading instead. What if I change the order? What if I adjust the time? Should I do more? Should I do less? Tiny decisions, microscopic, almost invisible, began draining all the willpower he had. The negotiations had simply moved from whether he would practice to how he would practice. His brain had found a loophole, and loopholes, Raphael realized, were just cracks through which his old self tried to crawl back. By the 10th day, his mornings had become an exhausting puzzle. His fixed wake-up time helped, but his unfixed routine sabotaged him. He felt frustrated, angry at himself for struggling with something so simple. Then, one evening, while rereading a translated lecture by the Zen teacher Dogen, he stumbled across a single line that pierced through the fog. Forms liberate the mind from choice. Without form, the mind clings to preference, and preference destroys practice. Raphael reread it again, and again. Suddenly, everything clicked. The monks didn't just wake up at the same time every day. They practiced the same sequence every day, in the same order, in the same way, without deviations. Not because they were obsessed with tradition, but because they understood a dangerous truth. Variety kills consistency. Every option is an escape route. Every choice is a negotiation. Every preference is a crack where the old self whispers, "Not today." If Raphael wanted unbreakable discipline, he needed to remove choice from the equation entirely. So he did. He created a rigid, unchanging structure: 20 push-ups, 10 minutes of meditation, 10 minutes of reading in that exact order, at the exact same time, every single morning. It felt almost absurd how simple it was. He didn't need to optimize. He didn't need a perfect morning routine. He just needed something fixed, something that removed the possibility of negotiation completely. The next morning, when the alarm rang, something felt different. There was no question, no thought, no mental chess match. He got up. He dropped to the floor. He started counting push-ups. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't inspiring. But for the first time, it was automatic. His mind still protested, but its arguments were quieter now, less confident. And as the days passed, That voice grew weaker. That inner enemy that once controlled him now sounded like a distant echo. By the second week, something remarkable happened. Raphael woke up 2 minutes before the alarm, not because he wanted to, because his body had started preparing for what came next. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, like watching a machine come to life inside him, a machine built from repetition, pain, and stubborn determination. By day 14, his feet touched the floor before his conscious mind even had time to intervene. He wasn't choosing anymore. He wasn't negotiating. He was simply moving. But the war was far from over. The real test, the one that would determine whether his discipline was real or fragile, was about to begin. By the third week, Raphael believed he had finally found his rhythm. The 5 a.m. wake-up had solidified into a reflex. The fixed sequence, push-ups, meditation, reading, began to feel strangely familiar, almost comfortable. For the first time in his life, discipline didn't feel like a battlefield, but a narrow path he simply walked along each morning. But comfort, he learned, is the enemy wearing a friendly face. Because just when things began to feel stable, the mind launched its most desperate attack. It started subtly. One morning, halfway through his meditation session, Raphael's thoughts drifted. Maybe tomorrow I could meditate longer, or shorter, or not meditate at all and go for a run instead. He didn't act on the thought, but it lingered, an invisible crack in the routine. On another morning, he wondered if 20 push-ups were really necessary. Maybe he should do 10, maybe 5, maybe just stretch instead. Again, he didn't act on it. But the thought poisoned something. It whispered that options still existed. And options, even unspoken ones, are the seeds of failure. Raphael noticed the pattern too late. By the end of week 3, he was negotiating again. Not openly, not the way he had before, but quietly, sneakily, like a serpent hiding in the grass of his mind. This is too rigid. You're overdoing it. You should add more variety. A flexible routine is healthier. You're not a monk, you're a normal person. But normal, Raphael knew, was the enemy. Normal was the person who quit after 3 days. Normal was the person who lived in excuses. Normal was the person he had vowed to bury. Still, the mind is persistent. It doesn't surrender simply because you want it to. It adapts. If it cannot attack the time, it attacks the structure. If it cannot break your schedule, it breaks your intention. If it cannot lure you into quitting, it lures you into altering. And altering is simply quitting dressed in logic. On day 23, Raphael had his first true moment of panic since the beginning. He woke up, went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, and suddenly had no desire to do push-ups. Not laziness, not exhaustion, something deeper, a rebellious instinct, almost primal, that screamed, "Enough, stop, break the pattern, take 1 day off." It terrified him how strong the urge was. He stood in the dim bathroom light, gripping the sink so tightly his knuckles turned white. He could feel his old self clawing at the walls of the identity he was trying to build, desperate to pull him back into comfort, back into inconsistency, back into the familiar cycle of failure. That was the moment he realized something profound. The mind does not fear discipline. The mind fears transformation. To transform means something must die. And the mind fights death with everything it has. That morning, Raphael forced himself through the routine. It was messy, miserable, uneven. But when he finished, he collapsed onto the floor with a shaking breath, understanding finally what the monks meant when they spoke of breaking through the self. He was at war not with weakness, but with identity itself, and identity does not die quietly. Week 4 arrived like a hammer. The resistance became brutal. Every morning, his mind screamed for variety, for freedom, for flexibility. He recognized the pattern now. It wasn't genuine desire. It was sabotage disguised as balance, common sense, and moderation. He refused to bend, so the mind escalated. It made him forgetful, distracted, angry, irritable. At one point, he snapped at his girlfriend for asking why he couldn't just take it easy. Another day, he felt a strange urge to deliberately skip the routine just to prove he was in control. This wasn't burnout, it was withdrawal. His brain was addicted to inconsistency. It craved chaos. It wanted the dopamine hit of novelty, and Raphael was starving it. The battle reached its peak on day 28. He woke up before the alarm again, but this time with a hollow, numb feeling in his chest. He moved through his push-ups mechanically, as if detached from his own body. Meditation felt like drowning. Reading felt like scraping letters from stone. Everything in him felt heavy, not tired, overwritten, as if the old self was dissolving, losing power, slipping away. And something new, something colder, quieter, more focused, was emerging in its place. The mind did not scream that day. It whispered, "You don't have to keep doing this. You're losing yourself." He froze, because this was the most dangerous lie of all, the lie that discipline would strip him of identity, remove his humanity, turn him into a machine. But in that moment, staring at the book in his hands, Raphael finally understood the truth. He wasn't losing himself. He was shedding himself. The weak parts, the inconsistent parts, the fearful parts, the negotiating parts. Pieces of him were dying, but they were the pieces that needed to die. By the beginning of week 5, something extraordinary happened. Raphael found himself halfway through his push-ups before he realized he had started. Meditation began without resistance. Reading became the easiest part of the morning. It was as if his body had learned a choreography he no longer needed to think about. His actions were no longer decisions. They were defaults. The old self didn't disappear in a dramatic moment. It faded like a shadow retreating from light. What emerged in its place was not a monk, nor a robot, nor a fanatic, but a man whose discipline was beginning to operate independently of his will. A man who no longer asked, "Should I?" A man who no longer considered, "Maybe later." A man who moved the way monks moved, unquestioningly, inevitably, consistently. Yet the universe was not done testing him, because just as his inner world finally began to submit, the outer world prepared its first true assault. On the 40th day, Raphael faced his first real crisis. It didn't come from laziness or doubt or the familiar whisper of excuses. It came from life itself, chaotic, unplanned, merciless. The kind of day that destroys the routines of ordinary people, not with force, but with surprise. He had a flight at dawn for an unexpected work trip, a delayed project, a client crisis. His alarm rang at 5 a.m., but he was already awake, heart pounding from stress, suitcase half-packed, emails flooding in before sunrise. He barely had time to breathe. The old Raphael would have said, "I'll practice tonight. I'll make up for it later." But later was the doorway through which his former self always returned. Still, as he stood in the airport bathroom, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of disinfectant in the air, he felt a wave of humiliation at the thought of doing push-ups on the bathroom tiles. People would see. People would stare. People would think he had lost his mind. And then he remembered the monks. Not their serenity, not their silence, not their rituals, but their inevitability. The bell rings. The practice continues. The environment changes. The mind storms. Life collapses. It doesn't matter. The bell rings, and the body responds. So he dropped to the floor in his airport clothes and completed all 20 push-ups. A businessman glanced over, confused. A kid pointed. Someone whispered, "What is he doing?" Raphael didn't look up. He dried his hands. He walked to his gate. He sat down and closed his eyes, meditating for 10 minutes while boarding groups were called. He opened his book, reading between announcements about turbulence and boarding passes. Nothing about it was graceful. Nothing about it was ideal. But it was done. Not perfect, unbroken. And that, he realized, was the point. In the weeks that followed, life seemed determined to test him again and again. On day 47, he woke up sick, feverish, dizzy, drenched in sweat. His body begged him to rest. He knew he couldn't perform the full routine, not without collapsing. But the monks had a saying, "A river that trickles is still a river." So he adapted, but did not break. 2 push-ups instead of 20. 3 minutes of meditation instead of 10. 1 page of reading instead of 10. Anyone else might have called it failure. Raphael called it continuity. Because gaps are death, breaks are death. Exceptions become identities. And he was shaping a new identity, one that survived on momentum, not conditions. On day 52, his girlfriend's mother visited for a week. His mornings became a maze of thin walls, creaking floors, and the fear of waking up the entire household. But at 5 a.m. sharp, he tiptoed into the bathroom, closed the door quietly, and began his routine in silence. Push-ups on a folded towel to mute the sound. Meditation sitting on the edge of the bathtub. Reading next to the sink under the dim glow of a nightlight. Ridiculous? Maybe? Necessary? Absolutely. Because the world doesn't pause for your discipline. Your discipline must continue within the world. Around day 60, something strange began happening. Something Raphael could not fully explain. He would wake up at 5 a.m. without an alarm clock, not with dread, but with clarity. He moved through the sequence with no negotiation, no internal commentary, no resistance. The routine had become an extension of his nervous system, like breathing or swallowing. Just as neuroscientists had written, the basal ganglia had taken over. Discipline had fused into instinct. One morning, halfway through his push-ups, Raphael suddenly realized he couldn't remember starting them. He was already on repetition 12, breathing steadily, rhythmically, as if someone else had taken control. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was the transformation beginning to show itself on the outside. By day 70, people around him began to notice. His co-workers said he looked serious lately, too serious. His friends joked that he had become a robot. His girlfriend whispered that his discipline was starting to scare her. He never argued. He simply nodded. Good. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them misunderstand. Let them call it obsessive, extreme, unhealthy. People fear in others what they cannot control in themselves. Consistency intimidates the inconsistent. Discipline exposes the undisciplined. And Raphael had no intention of returning to their level. But the final test arrived on a day he least expected. It was day 88, 2 days before completing his 90-day vow. Everything was running smoothly. He was automatic, stable, focused. Then, at 5 a.m., he woke up to the sound of a violent crash outside. A car accident. 2 vehicles had collided on the street below, one of them overturned. Raphael rushed outside along with several neighbors. Police, ambulances, chaos, shouting voices, an entire world of emergency unfolding in front of him. He spent half an hour helping, calling numbers, giving statements, directing traffic with others. In all the confusion, he forgot. Not the vow, not the identity, the routine itself. When he finally returned home, an hour had passed. His mind whispered gently this time, "It's okay. Today doesn't count. This was exceptional." For a moment, he almost agreed. But then something rose inside him, a force he barely recognized, a cold clarity he had never felt in his life. There are no exceptions. There are no special days. There is only continuity or collapse. So he stepped inside, shut the door, and without removing his shoes, began his push-ups on the living room floor. He meditated right after, still shaken but grounded. He read his 10 minutes with slow, steady breath. Not because he felt like it, not because it was convenient, but because the man he had become could not do anything else. It was no longer discipline. It was identity. On day 90, Raphael stood in his apartment at 5:30 a.m., the morning sun rising over the rooftops. He wasn't emotional. He didn't cry or celebrate. He didn't call anyone. He didn't post online. He simply finished the routine, quietly, inevitably, effortlessly. 3 months of unbroken practice. 3 months without gaps. 3 months of death and rebirth. The old Raphael was gone. Not improved, extinguished. And in his place stood someone entirely new. Someone people looked at with confusion, curiosity, and sometimes fear. Someone who did not negotiate with himself. Someone whose actions no longer depended on mood, energy, or convenience. Someone for whom discipline had become as natural as heartbeat. Someone unbreakable. As he washed his face and looked into the mirror, Raphael finally understood the meaning of gyoji, practice that continues by itself. He wasn't forcing discipline anymore. He wasn't trying to be consistent. He wasn't striving to become stronger. He was discipline. He was consistency. He was strength. People would ask him, "How did you do it?" And he would answer, with calm certainty, "I didn't. I simply became the kind of person who does." And once you become that person, there is no other way to live.